Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening once again. I'm Rustin Edwards, based in Geneva, with my esteemed colleague, Matt Stanley. And welcome to another edition of The Smoking Barrel. Matt, what's going on today? How you doing?
Good. Greetings, one and all. 2 in 2 weeks with rolling. 2023 started off with a massive bang.
Massive
all
bang.
good here, mate. Yeah, exactly. It's raining. It was raining here yesterday, and it's going to rain here on Thursday. So, whatever Greta said, she's wrong. Just getting that in there nice and early.
Well, I don't know. Raining in the desert, that's climate change.
Well, this is the thing. Everyone thinks, oh, God, it's raining in the desert. It's not uncommon. It's just, we struggle to deal with water. So they shut the schools and shut the roads. So it's like a snow day, but it's still a balmy 24 degrees. So I'm not complaining. Anyway, enough of the weather. Oil, energy. Yeah, look, relatively steady as she goes.
Well, it's been a steady upward climb is how it's been going.
Yeah, I think so. I just think, trajectory since the start of the year has been upward. All markets, all financial markets seem to have, started off on a good footing. I mean, Bitcoin, even though I detest it, holding above 23. It wasn't long ago, it was at 16. So yeah, it's all steady, it's all good. But it's what happens, if I look at where we were on the 4th of January when Brent was down to $78 a barrel, we're $10 higher than that now, 15% higher percentage terms. It's all relatively good. It's just, what we're going to talk about today. Will that continue? Will that relative confidence maintain in the oil markets? I'm not sure.
Well, it's been a case of what's been driving the market higher, and I think we can all agree that the China story has been one of the main factors in what's been pushing the markets higher. The China reopening, how strong will their demand profile be once their initial COVID wave gets walked out and the Chinese New Year comes to an end in about another week. We've also got the other piece of tailwind to the bulls is the pending Russian embargo and price cap for products that are exported out of Russia. And I think that's actually been a much stronger driver to the bullish side than anything else, because that's impacting products across the spectrum from gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, naphtha, jet fuel, because people have no idea what to expect. I mean, when you're looking at this from if you're playing cards right now, everybody knows that there's a hand that's going to be dealt, and nobody knows what deck you're going to use and what cards are going to be played, because G7 and the EU have been pretty quiet about what and how a product price cap is going to look like. I mean, we've seen already the impact of the crude oil price cap, implemented back on December 5th. There were a lot of stories out from a lot of different analysts that, we would see a drop off of anywhere between 1 to 2 million barrels a day of Russian crude exports, because there'd be no way they'd be able to handle that without having exports into the EU. And here we are almost 2 months into it, and Russian exports have actually gone up. And the market absorbed the crude without much of a hiccup.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was talking to a few guys yesterday in the shipping business. I mean, that's what I think the surprise of the year for me has been what's happened to freight so far this year, which, as I understand it, has relatively collapsed, especially on the clean tanker market. That I don't understand. I have to be honest. That makes no sense to me, because it certainly seems like people aren't worried that much about demand, which is obviously the main driver on freight. I don't see why that is. I think someone told me it's come off to, like, say, TC5 has come off to just under 200 world scale, whereas a month ago it was about 350. I don't get that, why that's come off so steep.
Well, I mean, it is a case, as you just mentioned, a case of what is the demand for the end product. I mean, if you take flat price moves out of the picture, we've been building stocks around the world for the last 8 weeks, both on products and crude oil. So it shows that there's definitely a lack of overall demand on a general sense. Now, you can go into each regional market and pick out different points that are going to be spikish here, spikish there. But when you think, okay, winter-wise, we've had a fairly mild winter in the Northern Hemisphere so far, knock on wood.
Well, I don't
Heating
know.
degree
It's a bit
days have
nippy
been
in
pretty
London right
low.
now.
Say again?
It's a bit nippy in London right now, I gather.
Well, it's a bit chilly now, but when you look at it from when winter starts to where we sit right now, going into February, with only about 50 days of winter left, we really haven't experienced a prolonged cold spell that has really put demand in for products. Now, yes,
Yeah.
today, yeah, there's a cold freeze in London. That's one day out of 60 so far. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
put a question that, there is a question of how much product overhang we have sitting on, and then the looming embargo and the looming price cap, and how that's going to actually impact product flows going into February. And that's, I think, contributing to a lot of the weakness, because nobody really knows how to play this hand out. I mean, because when you think of Russia and what they actually export out into the market, it's about 1 million barrels a day of gas oil, 600,000 of fuel oil, which is heavy fuel oil, 500 kbd of naphtha, and then 300,000 of refinery feedstocks. And then on top of that, there's about an additional 300,000 that's either gasoline and jet fuel going out on export markets. And I think that's where the question marks sit, is how is that actually going to play out if the embargo and the price cap come to full fruition, and how is that going to impact markets in general?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. I mean, like we said last week, this isn't just an EU problem. Where do they get their diesel? If you're sitting on as a trader in ARA, this is a worldwide problem, because the material just gets, the patterns change and the routings change. I would argue that no one knows the answer yet, and everyone is asking the same question. Everyone is saying, what is going to happen come the 5th of February? And then two questions form against that are, where will that product go, and how will that product be replaced? Now, it's clear that the EU, that ban will be strictly enforced for any Russian energy products, and it will simply not be able to go into the continent. Not even, maybe via a conduit, but we're not going to really see that for 6 weeks, bearing in mind it has to go via either, a lightering zone, wherever that may be, that forms itself over the coming weeks. It's clear that Africa are taking a lot more Russian oil products than they have done before. So that's a new pattern emerging. Latin America will probably do the same. India and China will obviously be the big buyers of the crude. But let's bear in mind that what are all those destinations have in common is that they're all price sensitive, and they need the imports of the products, especially China and India, and West Africa and East Africa for finished grade products as well. I mean, look, if it's not a UN enforced embargo, there's nothing to stop them buying that product at all. And like I said, it's different where that sits on the moral compass. But when you've got, however many billion people within those, I mean, just China and India alone is 2.5 billion, more than that probably now. I know India recently took over on the population chart there. At the end of the day, you want to give them the cheapest form of energy possible, whether that is gas or it's crude or it's refined products. It doesn't matter. And that they're going to be the people who are going to start importing. But you touched on it to start with, which is a great starting point, is supply has not fallen off yet. It hasn't had the effect with people saying, right, we're going to box that product, and that will effectively cripple the Russian economy, and that will mean that this conflict cannot be financed in the way it was being financed last year. Has that happened? It's still too early to say, but initial signs would be that no, it's not having any effect at all. It's just where it's going. Is it going on ships? Is it going into storage? It's still too early to say, but I can't see it continuing the path it did in December, put it that way.
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the rebalancing of how the market's going to have to react to the EU embargo, you take gas oil, for instance. I think gas oil is probably the easiest product for Russia to place, because it is almost a direct one-for-one replacement of how much gas oil historically has been exported from Europe into Africa. And you can almost do a one-for-one, barrel-for-barrel replacement of Russian gas oil directly into Africa versus Northern Europe refinery or Mediterranean refinery into Africa. And so you don't
Yes.
say that the EU, the European gas oil market can internally rebalance fully because you no longer export that gas oil you produce Europe into West Africa or North Africa. That is now substituted fully by Russian flows, and that stuff stays home, and that just keeps your market in balance. And so gas oil becomes a very easy one to look at. I don't think Russian flows in Latin America would work, and that's basically due to inventory financing issues, where a lot of the inventory inside of the Latin American countries is financed by Western banks, and Western banks have already backed out any Russian product financing, price cap, non-price cap. I think they're avoiding it like the plague. And therefore, I don't see Latin America as a solution for the Russian flows, unless it's Venezuela. Venezuela is its own little animal, and that's always going to be its own little animal, and that's not going to be anything solved anytime soon. But I think that's how you see Russian gas oil gets balanced. When you look at their high sulfur fuel, I mean, that's a bit trickier one, but I think the Middle East is going to be the end buyer of high sulfur fuel from Russia that they've always been, especially during the summer months when their utility burn goes from 600,000 tons a month to 1.2 million tons a day, especially when he's getting the heat of the summer.
Yeah. And, Pakistan and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, these.
Well, I mean, I think Russia's already signed a supply deal with Pakistan. I thought that was something that came up.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting part there, just want to pick up on a couple of things. But the first one, the interesting part there for me, being starting in the trade finance side of the business, is it is clear that historically, when you were going to sell to a Pakistan or whoever it might be, with high political risk, and you take out a political risk insurance policy for the payment, it's clear that is not on the agenda. Russia have got to keep the wheels turning. And you can't worry about something as insignificant as getting paid for that product. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you just I'll just pay us when you're late, when you can, lads, and girls, lads and ladettes. So, that's a big part of a big dynamic shift in the oil industry. Because before, there was, that's where the margins were. People who couldn't afford products, that's where you made the money. Are Russia saying we don't need that much margin, but we want the short, so we're happy to take the payment risk? I think that's probably their game plan.
Well, I mean, you think of that under the case of you're trying to prosecute a war or a special military operation, and all those tanks, all those jeeps, all those personnel carriers, and all those ships require fuel, and so you can't afford to lose your refinery runs because I can't find a home for this product that I don't really need, but I got to get rid of. Otherwise, I start shutting.
You're freezing on me, Edwards. Oh, you're back.
Okay.
We'd love you for 10 seconds. It's fine. We can pick it up. We are professionals. No, I think your point regarding seasonality is a good one. I mean, I used to do quite a bit of business in Argentina, and all those barrels came out of Primorsk. That is a usual trade pattern, especially when Argentina start buying for the winter southern hemisphere winter. So that we'll see probably around mid-April, if they will take that, because they can meet the cold properties. I know we're getting technical here, sorry viewers, but it's an important part of it all, because it's historically where the barrels have gone, and will they continue to do so? The high sulfur straight run, I agree with you. This is one for me that I think is a really important pattern to watch this year, because so much of that high sulfur straight run from Russia used to go into the Gulf Coast refiners, as we've spoken about before, and then they've replaced that with Iraqi straight run. And so what happens? You said the Middle East during summer burning season, which will really start being mapped out mid-April, something like that. People want to start getting products landed into the Red Sea or Arab Gulf, wherever it might be. Do they burn straight run? Do you care about that giveaway anymore? Historically, it's only really been cracked. Is it a cost game where people will buy straight run fuel oil for power generation?
Well, it all comes down to price, because a BTU is a BTU, and if the price is cheap enough, you're going to buy it.
Yeah.
And
That's a British thermal unit, by the way, if no one knows what a BTU is.
and I think the other piece of that matter is going to be how much of the straight run can China import in for their bitumen mix that they bring in consistently in from Malaysia. How much of that will find its way into there as the balancing mechanism to keep the Russian exports stable.
You broke up a bit there. So you said about Singapore and Malaysia taking it from Russia.
Well, I would say China. I mean, so seeing the sulfur straight run into Malaysia for blending and export into China as part of the bitumen mix trade as the balancing mechanism between utility demand in the Middle East and refinery consumption in China. And so you could see how that high sulfur fuel can get placed on that arbitrage flow rather simply and not really lose a beat. I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's another sort of I would say anomaly that the Singapore fuel oil market, especially, has had to take into account this year. Have been the vast quantities of 0.5 RMG that China are exporting. It's flooded the Singapore market, which has collapsed premiums. That's obviously had a knock-on effect elsewhere, especially in Fujairah as well, where it's held steady at best. If you were to look at the glass is half full. So the thing is, there has been a lot of pressure on the demand side of the equation so far this year, but it is not reflected in flat price.
No, not at all. But then
this is where does it go then? Once demand does start coming back, we see the the data come in regarding the spike in demand. So many are predicting from Lunar New Year, which is we're right in the middle of it now. When we do see those demand stories coming back, does the market then sell off because energy prices are going back up and people are going to start pricing in recession again because of inflation?
Well, I don't think, though, that the current strength in markets are driven primarily by Chinese New Year. I think it is all the uncertainty around the Russian exports, because everything that's moved up has all been product crack related. When you really look at it from a holistic market position, yes, flat price is high, yet we are continually building stocks. So the markets are in contango in the United States. Front month Brent has finally flipped into backwardation. That was in contango for the most part of January. Well, so from a market structure standpoint, the market says we've got too much crude, yet flat price is going up because product cracks being pulled up by the product cracks. The one thing I find the most interesting to look at is actually because when you look at the product crack on naphtha, it's gone from -20 to -3. Now, in a market where you don't have consumer demand and you don't have petchem demand, the only reason why the crack would be moving up as quickly as it's moved up here in the last few weeks is that people are pricing that there'll be a shortfall of naphtha once the Russian embargo comes into play. Russia exports 500.
It's still a negative crack. I mean,
it's still negative. Yeah. Russia exports 500,000 barrels a day of naphtha, and so when you have that amount of volume in the marketplace, that all of a sudden goes to zero potentially, despite the fact that petchem margins are terrible, and there's no demand for plastics, and there's no consumer demand for finished goods. The petchem market says that, okay, we don't need this naphtha, yet people are pricing as if this naphtha is just going to vanish from zero. And I think naphtha is actually the squeeze product that Russia has a problem with, because it is a combination of gasoline blending or petchem feed.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at
it's funny because, sorry, just on that, you look at where the gas oil crack is, for example, the gas oil refining margin, I mean, that's roofed. So gas oil is at highest since the beginning of November, whereas crude, I mean, we were more or less, we were $86 at the beginning of January. So gas, you're right, the whole energy complex is being bid by purely on a crack-related basis.
Yeah, because it is an uncertainty about what is this price cap going to do and how's it going to look like? Does Russia have enough clean ships in order to redirect clean product, which naphtha, gas oil, jet fuel, those are all clean products that need clean tonnage to move. You know, the high sulfur fuel, that can be moved on crude oil tonnage just as much as crude. But if you're going to move one product versus another, you're probably more incentivized to move the crude oil. So to me, it does point to the fact that if Russia can't find a home for all of its naphtha, because I think it can find a home for the gas oil. I think it can find a home for the fuel oil. They can't find a way to transport the naphtha.
You're gone again.
Here I am going on a rant, and I can't even get to.
Oh, I think the feds were muted you.
Well, if Russia can't find a home for the naphtha becomes the pinch point, and then that's what's going to drive Russia to make a decision. Do you start shutting down your more inefficient refineries because you can't find a place to place the naphtha?
Well, if that's the case, then you'd be bid fuel oil as well, right?
Well, if you look at what's happened with the fuel oil markets, Singapore has gone from contango to backwardation.
Right.
So
is that so your view is that naphtha and fuel oil has
I think
really
it's more naphtha more than fuel. I think naphtha is the pinch point.
Interesting. Well, we'll see. I mean, yeah, I mean that would make sense as to why, you know, you can't really sell cracks at the minute. I can't form an argument to sell cracks or regrades or whatever it might be, any diffs. I think you know, is it underlying strength in the lack of crude? As we discussed already, no, it's not. It's still moving, and the price cap for now, I know it's only 6 weeks since it was imposed at the beginning of December or so, doesn't seem to make any difference to supply. It's the anticipation of what all of this might be if they need to shut some refineries, and all of that is adding to the whole argument, and as to why your $30 oil calls are questionable.
Well, they're not questionable yet because we'll be flooded with crude oil if they start shutting down refineries. They got to put that crude somewhere.
Well, stay in the ground and become squashed prawns again.
So coming up this week, you know, as we come in here, we've got more economic data coming.
Are you there?
Impact how people are anticipating interest rates, which are going to impact oil markets. We've got U.S. GDP on Thursday. That's going to be a big number to watch. We got EIA information from U.S. stocks on Wednesday.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a continual build in crude, which most people are probably going to ignore until February 4th.
Well, I mean, there's just under 1 million barrels a day of U.S. refining capacity that's in maintenance at the moment. So that does, I think, I think what we might see is, more crude stocks, but more draws on products. So I think that only adds to the.
Well, the only one that's been drawing has been gas oil.
On crude will probably be translated as a bullish sign. I think you could see flat price roofing on the back again. Seems to be the theme this week of what's happening on the crack side and the refining side. So I don't know, a build on crude, I think, will be translated as a bullish sign.
Well, gasoline stocks in the U.S. have been building for the last 6 weeks as well. So even with the lower refinery runs, you know, last week we almost had a 4 million barrel build. If we have the same type of build this week with lower refinery runs, it tells you that the U.S. consumers aren't driving for the sake of driving because they're not drawing down gas.
No, I agree. I think, but as our guys said last week, gas oil stocks, again, it falls down to this mid distillates. And I know we've been banging this drum for a while now, but, you know, core refined products in the US, so your jet fuels, your gas oils, your gasolines, as an aggregate, as a total, are 25% lower than the 5-year average. Now, whether that's skewed because of what happened with COVID, what happened with the big freeze, etc. Of course, there's always going to be data points that skew it either way. But in essence, I think that's what the market is looking at. Is looking at, okay, products have been building recently, but they're still lower than the 5-year average and a lot lower.
Is the 5-year average relevant anymore? And I ask that question.
It doesn't matter.
As demand patterns change inside of people's consumption, i.e. more efficient vehicles continue to come out, more people are buying electronic vehicles than they have in the past. I mean, if you look at the whole demand profile here in Europe, it's going to change come 2030 and 2035 when new car sales all have to be. there is a question that 5-year bans may not have the relevance as they used to have when you had everybody buying internal combustion engines. So, looking back, as you said, you've got the stock builds of 2020, 2021, then the stock drawdown, and then now your 5-year ban gets skewed to the upside because of that contango market that developed with COVID.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think if energy prices keep on going the way they're going, the way that people are talking about them, we'll be back to getting around by horse and cart. So I think that if I'm going to look at anything, it's it's horse prices. I bet you I am bid horses. That's all I'm going to say.
You've heard it here first. Matt Stanley with the horse oil swap.
The horseplay. Don't get your horseplay on me.
Well, I think
insert disclaimer.
Time for today. Matt, pleasure as always having a chat with you. Look forward to next week.
Yes, mate. Always. Yeah. Take care, guys. Like and subscribe.
And enjoy your day.
Yeah. There. Yeah. Ciao, ciao.